Hello everyone, welcome back to Relax with Animal Facts. I am Steph Wolf, and today I am going to be learning with you about our furry, scaly, or possibly even slimy friends. And in today's case, we are definitely covering a fuzzy friend of ours, because we are covering the oh so wonderful Bumblebee. This is, of course, a very special listener episode dedicated to Claire, Olivia, Carol, and to Hender100K, who left a review requesting the Bumblebee. Thank you all for taking the time to request an animal, and I hope you enjoy your very own episode. If you want to request an animal to learn about on the show and have your very own episode, you can send in an animal request in one of three ways. You can submit your request directly to relaxwithanimalfacts.com under the Animal Request tab. And lastly, you can always send an email to relaxwithanimalfacts@gmail.com. So don't be shy, please request your animals because I always love to hear from you. There is an extinct animal miniseries happening on Patreon, so if you want to learn more about some very cool animals that are not exactly around anymore, it's available at the patreon.com/relaxwithanimalfacts, and all of the information is in the description of the episode. And so before we go into the episode, I am just going to say where I got my facts from, because without these resources, this episode would not have been possible. I got my facts from Britannica.com, mentalfloss.com, ontwf.org, the SCA.org, etimonline.com, and lastly, treehugger.com. All of those are cited in the description or the show notes of this episode, so if you want to learn more and explore the plethora of knowledge and information on those websites, I greatly encourage you to do so. And now I would like for all of you to notice maybe where you're carrying some tension. The most common, from what I understand, seems to always be in the shoulders. So for you it might be there, for some it might be in the hands or in the arms or even in the head. But regardless of what it is, and in my case it's in my hands, we won't really be needing all that tension for where we are going. So I encourage you to do your very best right alongside me of relaxing whatever it is that is super tense, because we are going to be going together into an immersive experience into the meadows where the bumblebee resides. The bee in general is likely a creature you are somewhat already familiar with, but it is often the case that the animals that we consider most common and regular are the ones which we might actually know the least about, and that has certainly been true for me. But within the broader scope of bees, we are covering the bumblebee. It is a large, hairy, black and yellow social bee. It averages around 2.5 centimeters in length and will live just under a month at about 28 days. Those who have had contact with the bumblebee can almost immediately recognize them just because of how round and dense they are. But the bumblebee's scientific name is bombus. Now, bombus is a Latin word that describes a deep, hollow sound of a hum or a buzz, so we can see why they were given this scientific name. The American bumblebee, for example, is the Bombus pennsylvanicus, so it is likely that in Pennsylvania the American bumblebee was first discovered. But I think it is important to maybe cover a few things in regards to maybe distinctions between the bumblebee and some other bee species we may be familiar with, bumblebee and honeybee are not interchangeable. They are not the same creature. While they both belong to the same family of Apidae, the bumblebee belongs to the Bombus genus, while honeybees belong to the Apis genus. So they are under the same family, but they are not under the same genus. When we use those terms like family or genus, we are just referring to sort of a taxonomic system of placing animals into categories. So there are species, and then above species is genus, above genus is family. After that we have order, class, phylum, and it continues on to the domain. So this really helps us get a grasp on creatures in terms of classifying them. But under the distinction of bee, there are 20,000 known species, and all of these species can differ very widely in terms of physical characteristics, their behaviors, their eating or pollination habits, and also their habitat. And in the case of the bumblebee and the honeybee, their appearance will be pretty different. Bumblebees have that distinctive physical characteristic of being very round and fuzzy. They look to be very dense and plump insects. The honeybee, however, is smaller and also thinner. We can sometimes mistake a honeybee for a wasp because of the thinness of their body, and also because honeybees have a very clear distinction between their head and their abdomen, just like wasps do. Bumblebees, however, look to be entirely of one piece, just one floating mass of fuzziness. But there are things in which the bumblebee and the honeybee share some commonality. They both have queens, workers, and drones in their hives, but the bumblebee will only survive during the warm season. Only the queen is going to be able to hibernate to start a new colony the next spring. The colonies between a bumblebee and a honeybee are going to differ in size. The bumblebee is going to have a generally smaller colony, and while they do collect nectar and store it as honey, they do not hoard it in those very large amounts that honeybees do. So because the bumblebee isn't concerned with surviving through the winter, they do not store as much. The honeybee, who has to survive during those very cold winters, are going to store a lot of that honey. So the bumblebees are going to be eating and consuming that sugary nectar before they have a chance to convert it into honey. So we never collect honey from bumblebees. But although bumblebees die by the fall time, they do have a very unique way of controlling their body temperature. They will do a kind of shivering movement to warm themselves. The size of the bumblebee and of their very hairy coats, along with this kind of shivering of their flying muscles, can help them stay warm when it gets to be pretty cool. There is also one pretty important difference. The honeybee can only sting one time before they die, but the bumblebee can actually sting multiple times. But thankfully, bumblebees do not form these large swarms like honeybees do, and they really only sting when they are truly provoked. Like other bee species, only the queen or worker bumblebees can sting. All of the worker bumblebees are female. So those are some important distinctions between bumblebees and the honeybee. They are not interchangeable, and their differences are pretty stark. But if you ever hear the term humblebee, that is the same as a bumblebee. Those two are interchangeable and refer to the exact same species. And one of the reason bumblebees are just so cool is because of their essential role in nature. Of course, honeybees are going to pollinate more than bumblebees just because of the sheer size of their colonies. But even with these very high differences, one Canadian study found that 70% of pollinator visits to crops were made by managed honeybees, meaning that these bees have beekeepers, while 28.2% were made by completely wild honeybees. And what this study was aiming at was to show that managed honeybees alone are not enough to maximize the yields in an agricultural system. Wild pollinators like bumblebees, which are never managed or domestic, they are just as necessary as the managed bumblebee. Bees in general play such a crucial role, and in playing their crucial role, some bees, like the honeybee, produces some of the most naturally sweet things on this planet that never rots and never spoils. Bees as a whole are gifts and amazing creatures, and we see that the bumblebee in specific has just as crucial a role to play. Now, the bumblebee is absent from most of Africa and the lowlands of India, but they have been introduced into Australia and to New Zealand to help in the pollination of various flowering plants. Now here, as we're learning about the bumblebee, the study of bees as a whole is called apiology. So if we remember the family of which both the bumblebee and the honeybee are a part of, it is called apis. So we can see where apiology comes from. Bumblebees have a very quick metabolism, and this means that they will have to eat pretty much continuously throughout the day. Any one bumblebee with a full stomach is only ever about 40 minutes from starvation, according to Goulson. This means that they have to live life in the fast lane, when even at a full stomach you are only 40 minutes from dying of starvation. You have a lot of work to do, and you have that work to do always. You may have noticed that the bumblebee will oftentimes buzz around inside of a flower. That is something that is referred to as buzz pollination. The bumblebee will contract the muscles in their thorax very quickly in order to produce a fast vibration that will shake the pollen grains from the flower so that the bumblebee can get at the pollen. So that is why they buzz around on the inside of flowers. And bees, as they are going from flower to flower, are covered with a very oily film that makes them waterproof. What this means is that whenever they land on a flower, they will leave a kind of signature behind, an oily signature. Other bees are able to smell these footprints that are left on the flowers, and so they know this flower has already had its nectar taken, so I'm going to go ahead and move on. So it's like bees are very cooperative with one another, communicating with each other through these chemical signatures that they leave on the flowers. Their scent also plays a different purpose of helping them find their way back home. The scent will act like a GPS for them to navigate all the way back home to ensure they do not get lost. And talking about cooperation, the bumblebees can act like little organic air conditioning units. If the nest gets a little bit too hot for comfort, the worker bees will put themselves near the entrance and fan the hot air out. They want to keep their nest at a very specific 86 degrees Fahrenheit, because if their body temperature rises a little bit too high, the bumblebees will die. that temperature is about 111 degrees, and they are constantly around the clock, moving and working. One thing that a researcher named Goulson found is that hordes of male bumblebees like to gather on hilltops. In a study of bees in Scotland, which is one of my favorite countries in the whole world, Goulson found that areas on top of hills will attract a lot of male bees in comparison to other areas that might be a little bit more flat or even halfway up a hill. He guessed that this may be an effort to attract mates, but scientists have not exactly observed this sort of pickup technique ever actually working. But bumblebees produce a lot more eligible males than they do females. There are about 7 males for every queen born, so most males never get to mate. And the queen bee is the controller of the genetics of their offspring. Male bumblebees will only have 1 chromosome and no father. So to produce a son, a queen bee merely has to lay an unfertilized egg. To have daughters who make up the very entirety of the bee workforce, a queen bee fertilizes her eggs that she's been storing since the previous summer. So depending on the need of the hive, I would suppose queens make more females or more males. But we see that the queen really calls the shots in the colony. And the world's largest bumblebee is the Bombus dalbomi of South America. They are large enough to merit the distinction of flying mice. Now, if you actually Google a picture of them, they are not that big, but they are significantly larger than many of the other bumblebees that you can see in North America. Now, in terms of communication of the bumblebee, they do not dance to one another. Instead, they will use the vibration of their wings along with chemical signals, like pheromones, for example, to communicate with one another. So that is another distinction between the honeybee and the bumblebee. Bumblebees do not dance, the honeybee does dance. So let us move to the final fact of the episode, which is the name Bumblebee. Where does it come from, or what does it mean? The bumblebee, which is also sometimes referred to as the humblebee, is described as a large, hairy type of bee that was first given to the bumblebee in the 1520s, and it was replacing a Middle English word, humble bee. And the Middle English word humblebee comes from also Middle English bombeln, which means to boom or to buzz, and that is from the late 14th century. So the bumblebee is called what it is because of its booming, buzzing. And now let us move to the review portion of the episode. This is where I read your very special reviews that have been left, usually on Apple Podcasts, but you can leave one on wherever you listen. And this one comes from a user named Walk You in the Tall Trees, which I will just refer to as Trees for short. So Trees writes, Steph Wolf gives you the lowdown on all of our fellow animals while keeping a calm and soothing tone. I'm so glad I stumbled upon this. Thank you, Trees, for taking the time to leave such a wonderful review. I am also very glad that you stumbled upon this podcast and that you are now a part of the Animal Podcast family, as are all the rest of you listening. It is always my pleasure to give you a lowdown on all of our fellow creatures and critters, and I'm grateful that I get to do it every week. And I entirely forgot to say that Trees was writing all the way from the United States of America, where the American bumblebee is as well. If we remember the name of the American bumblebee scientifically, it's the Bombus pennsylvanicus. So Walk You in the Tall Trees has probably seen one of these before. If this show helps you relax and to rest, and you want to give back to the show in some way, leaving a review is a really quick but also a tremendously impactful thing you can do to help the show grow. For those of you that want more of the Relax with Animal Facts podcast, there are bonus episodes, including an exclusive Extinct Animal miniseries, intro-free episodes, audio blogs. All of those things are available at patreon.com/relaxwithanimalfacts. So all of the relevant links are in the description. Again, if you want to send an animal request, you can do so by sending a message to Relax with Animal Facts on Instagram, or you can go to relaxwithanimalfacts.com and click on the Animal Request tab. And lastly, you can always send an email to relaxwithanimalfacts@gmail.com. What a wonderful episode it was today to learn about the humble bumblebee, the bee that many of us hear buzzing all around and we can see quite frequently, but by learning more about them, we've made the common unique, we've made the ordinary special, and that is one of the great gifts of knowledge. I hope you have all enjoyed this podcast episode, and I hope that you will all join me on next week's adventure with next week's animal. Take care.